I'm in Savannah's Bonaventure Cemetery, and have you ever noticed that if you walk through an old cemetery like Bonaventure or Colonial Park Cemetery in the historic district, you will eventually notice something that feels too consistent to ignore. The rows may be uneven, the stones weathered, and the paths worn down by time, but the bodies themselves, they're not placed randomly. They're placed east to west. Here and in Europe, across decades and centuries, the same alignment appears. The headstones stand at one end, and the footstones, or the other end of the grave, are on the other, east-west. It's not a coincidence. Let's take a look here. Right here, that's east. Not a coincidence. It's not merely a tradition. It's theologically embedded in the ground. It's also an archaeological feature that once you notice it, you'll never forget it. The reason old graves face east and west is one of the most widespread yet overlooked features of the historic Christian burial practices. The bodies were placed so that if a person stands or sits up, they be looking to the east. And it reflects a system of belief that shaped not only by how people were buried, but how they understood death. To read an old cemetery correctly is to recognize that it's just a resting place for the dead, but it's a map of expectations. I'm J.D. Bias, award-winning photojournalist and historian, and this is Lens on History, where we show you how to find hidden history, interpret it, and document it. And this is Becky, our researcher and producer. Say hey, Beck.
Hey, we're glad you're here. I think you're going to find this episode very interesting and maybe even a little inspirational.
Now, modern visitors tend to see cemeteries in places of remembrance, names, dates, and epitaphs. And these are what draw the eye. But earlier generations believed something more fundamental: the position of the grave, the body, and that mattered as much as the inscription on the stone. In traditional Christian burials, the headstone, often called a headboard, marks the western end of the grave, as I said. The deceased is quite literally ready to stand up and face the east. The detail is not decorative. It's theological, and it tells how the body was placed, and more importantly, why. Because early European and American Christian theology, the direction was neutral. The east holds a unique, powerful place in Christian symbolism. It's the direction of the sunrise, the moment when the darkness gives way to light. And from the earliest centuries of Christianity, this daily event became a natural symbol of resurrection. Just as Christ rose, believers expect that they will rise as well. What'd you find on that, Beck?
Reading here, it says, this symbolic association was reinforced through Scripture. In the Gospel of Matthew, the return of Christ is described in explicitly directional language. It says, "For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man." The implication was clear to the early Christians. The east was not just a direction, it was the anticipated point of arrival.
By the way, I finished this entire episode, had it all edited and all, but and I realized I forgot to ask you to check out our affiliate links down below. If you come to Savannah, or even if you live here, you can get a discount if you go to the affiliate links and check out with LOH as a coupon code. And you can do the same thing by going to lensonhistory.com and going to the website to the affiliate links. And I remind you that if we do get you the book and you sign up, we'll get a small commission, but it doesn't cost any more to you. It costs the same thing. So come on to Savannah, have a tour. Matter of fact, they even have a tour of Bonaventure Cemetery here. Neil's usually the person that does it. He's a good tour guide. So come on to Savannah. Gus and I, here's Gus down here. Where is he? There he is. It's a cemetery, but he's in heaven out here. He loves it. So let's continue with the show. Over time, these beliefs were combined to form a consistent expectation about where and how Christ would return. That expectation shaped behavior. And Beck, what do you got on that? What do the notes say?
Early Christian practice made the symbolism of eastward orientation visible. Worshippers prayed facing east. Churches were constructed with altars at the eastern end, a layout often referred to as ad orientem. This meant that both clergy and congregation physically oriented themselves toward the same direction during worship.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen that. Some baptismal rites reinforce the same thought, same logic. Some traditions, such as Orthodox Christians, the churches, during baptism, the candidates would turn toward the west. Now, I'm giving a tour over here. I have to stop for a second. By the late 1800s, burial practices in the United States began to change. It has a new mindset started to emerge, and the rise of rural and garden cemeteries introduced new priorities.
So you mean like the newer portions of Bonaventure and all of Laurel Grove, correct?
Yes, landscape design, aesthetic appeal, and accessibility became central to the considerations. That's when the Queen Anne architecture style in buildings became popular, as with asymmetric designs. Impressionistic art started in the 1870s with Monet, and then 1880s Van Gogh, Gauguin, Cezanne, and it took it farther. The abstract movement changed things then, back at the turn of the 20th century. Before that time, styles tended to be very symmetric, very ordered, same on one side as the other.
If you visit the Owens Thomas House Museum here in Savannah, you can see false or blind doors and windows that have been set to balance the building's plan. If you take a tour, the docent will more than likely point that out to you.
Yes, and cemeteries followed the same trends. Back then, everything had to have equal balance. In fact, if you visit Bonaventure Cemetery here in Savannah, you notice that older graves around the colonial section are east to west, which is back over there. And after the American Civil War, the rest of the property was developed into grave sites, and the orientation was in several different directions. They were no longer arranged solely according to theological principles. They were planned on winding roads and varied terrain and picturesque views. That's when you see Victorian houses being built in Savannah and other cities, and along with them, the end of the city squares. That's when they stopped right after the Civil War, stopped making them, laying out the old Oglethorpe plan. That was when General Sherman came to town in 1864. So you can see antebellum houses on Whitfield Square. And on one side is antebellum for the Civil War, and the other side is Victorian. Practical concerns replaced the order pattern. And that's hidden archaeology and cemeteries that once you understand why the old graves faced east, they became readable in a new way. The alignment of graves, it reveals chronology. Older sections tend to preserve the traditional orientation, and newer sections, well, they change. The direction of the headstone doesn't matter anymore. I tell people, I guess people figured out that Jerusalem's not to the east, which I'm warning now. It's someplace down below us on the other side of the globe. So that orientation connects it physically and the placement to theological beliefs in the old days. In that sense, cemeteries become, I just dropped my bag, hold on. It connects physical placement to theological beliefs. And in this sense, cemeteries become historical documents. Well, they're not written, but, well, they're written in, not in ink, but in stone and soil. These here are, except for that one right there. I just noticed that one. See that one? These over here, they're all north-south. That one, though, we'll have to find out who was buried there. Probably an older person. Let's check out the date. She held on to the old beliefs. So her grave, running east and west, and she's right next to other family members, which are right here. There she is. Here are their graves. They're going north and south. So yeah, the old timer kept with the old beliefs. Would you come back?
Remember, if you have any thoughts on this topic or just even want to just say hello, just leave a note down below because we'd love to hear from you.
And as always, if you didn't already know this story, now you know. I'll see you next time.
Bye. Go dogs.